Western culture framing that when you're talking about looking at measurements and changes in activation of brain waves, the difference between where if you place the object in the beginning of the sentence versus if you place the object in the end of a sentence. That's just a very basic premise. It doesn't have anything to do with the language. Like, we're talking about English, but the premise is placing an object at the beginning of a sentence versus placing the object at the end. And this is going to change where the subject is placed in the sentence relative to the object. We're looking at subject to object relative placement and how that affects the brain. Well, guess what? There's a difference in how they the brain is activated, and then beyond that, determined by the content of the object and the subject. If we're talking about having a still image and a landscape, it's going to be different than having something that needs to be rotated or moved. So the parts of your brain that activate when you're imagining a landscape are going to be different than when you're imagining a three-dimensional object moving. Well, it sounds obvious, but until you look in the brain to analyze the difference, you're not gonna fucking know the difference if the brain actually activates in different parts or not. So when you start measuring the stimuli versus the activation, then you can confirm or deny. And this person saying it's tantamount to phrenology is a complete fucking moron. There's no other way to say it. Like, that person is a fucking idiot. And the reason I say it that way is because sometimes people frame it as if all questions are equally valid, like, especially if that person is claiming to be a specialist in psychology. Like, fMRIs aren't the best thing now. There's other things that have been developed, and especially when you start to use things in tandem. But the issue is if somebody's comparing an fMRI to phrenology, that person is a fucking moron. That person really just has no clue what an fMRI machine does. And it's one of those things when people don't understand something, a lot of times they get really angry about it and come out really strong against it in a way that when you, like, my thing is, because I was like in the psychology department in 2007 and between 2000, well, yeah, it was like, no, 2004 to 2007 when I was doing the lab stuff. And like, in that time was right when the fMRI machine was being brought in.
Yeah, I just missed you.
Psychology department and not the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. So there was a whole lot of cultural change happening. And what happened at the time was it was mostly men. And then they started hiring capable women that were in the market that were being pushed out of the jobs by the male-dominated department. So then that's why you have these leftover assholes who are like just mad that you had these class of women come in and then do a bunch of awesome research using the fMRI machine. So then their whole careers are spent trying to undermine the fMRI itself, because in reality, they're just mad because a bunch of women came in and did awesome work in like a super short amount of time, because these dudes were trying to fucking bank on the MRI in the bullshit, because they were probably manipulating the fucking activation for their own studies because it wasn't in real time. And that's the problem, is those guys who were trying to lean heavy on the MRI for psychology stuff. Like, MRI is basically useless for psychology stuff. Like, in reality, like an fMRI, that's a completely different machine. But an MRI for psychology, are you kidding? This might as well be doing phrenology with an MRI at this point. Not when they first came out. When they first came out, it was fucking revolutionary. But in 2020, an MRI is bullshit for psychology. An fMRI is like way beyond, because then you do things like ultrasound, you do EEGs, um, and then it's like you, if you are doing all of these things, then you start to understand like, oh, yeah, there's volume changes in the brain over short periods of time, but you can't see that as easily with an fMRI. You can, but it's not as easy as when you're doing ultrasound. When you're doing ultrasound, you can't see the activation. So there's all these things that like you really can't get with one thing, which is why when people are like, oh, fMRI is bullshit, I'm an MRI person, that person's an idiot. They're just a vestigial part of academia at this point.
Well, one of the really great points that you bring up, if people are trying to reconcile the limitations of different technologies in psychological research, so for instance, using an ultrasound to observe volume changes and then using an fMRI to observe activation, some people would say, okay, well, why can't we have somebody perform the same task in an fMRI and then have them perform the exact same task while receiving an ultrasound? But the thing is, there are environmental variables that affect the body in very specific ways, such as haptic object recognition and haptic, which is like passive touch. And that's what I was researching with novel stimuli. So basically, just the act of receiving an ultrasound or having somebody contact your body, or being sitting in a chair that's different from laying down in an fMRI would perhaps yield a different result and may invalidate the results of the research.
And then even on top of that, one of the things that we were studying as well was how well was the brain able to perceive the haptic feedback concept. So we were studying if people described haptic like object, like gave the tactile description of objects, if the brain would be able to react to it in a way where it's like it doesn't really, but when you actually touch something, your brain reacts to it, and there's like a whole, so it's not, it's like the brain is really good. It's not, you're not going to be able to trick it into like thinking it's being touched. But if you try to, like, if you're talking about rotating an image versus actually seeing something rotate, it's almost identical. It's almost the identical like activation. So that's where you're starting to talk about when like, there's so many different things, because then you're only looking at the brain. Only until recently were people actually starting to look at different parts of the body to see like, oh yeah, muscle memory is potentially being activated in the parts of the body as well, to explain the like capacity to overcome reaction times in certain areas, because it's like there's a certain time relay delay that is going to prevent people from reacting in actual real time theoretically to certain things, but the body is able to overcome these things, and there's not a fantastic reason why the body's able to overcome these things beyond like there are certain reactions that can be, it's like effectively, if you have the visualizations for the movements of all your arm, all of the possible positions actually being located in your arm instead of in your brain, because having them located in your arm allows them to react faster than if your brain has to send the signals back and forth to visualize your arm, than to actually keep the memories located in your arm. That's some super modern theory shit that they can't necessarily, like, the tests are in the early stages of being reproduced because the design is so different to figure out, like when you're doing like EEG tests on your arm to see what type of activation happens, like, but this is how they're able to then reproduce those signals and create better prosthetics for people who lost limbs. So that's how these things go from theory to being reproduced in the real world to something that applies to, like, why would somebody need to study this? It's like, well, if you lose your fucking arm, you want somebody to have studied how your brain communicates with your pinky,
That's
because
actually
be able to build a prosthetic that then you can get haptic feedback from that prosthetic to trick your brain into thinking you actually have a hand again.
there have been incredible leaps and bounds made in the field of prosthetics. Every so often, I see some new video of a new robotic limb that is moving through thought from electrical signals sent through, you know, what's left of their arm or through their shoulder, or electrodes that are placed further upstream even. And so when somebody can, like, it might be a chunk of metal and plastic with some glass in it somewhere, but when they're moving that thing because they're thinking, that's incredible stuff right there. Those are like legit bionic people.
Well, and it's so ableist of people to like try to limit the development of that stuff because they've seen some Terminator movies and haven't actually done any research. It's so crazy to me that that is what's guiding people's understanding of technology development. I'm not really surprised, but when I hear people talk about AI and robotics and shit, it's like, oh, you've been listening to too many fucking colonizers, is what it comes down to. Because, like, that's the only way that those people can fathom using that technology is like, how can we colonize something? How can we turn it into fucking profit? Instead of being like, oh, how can we help disabled people? Or how can we, like, prevent people who are aging from succumbing to the ills of having a human body with this technology? But instead it's like, yeah, let's profit, profit, profit. So that's kind of why, when we have all this technology being presented to us by the people who are constantly trying to exploit us, it frustrates me that then people like rebel and become Luddites against that framing because they haven't watched enough Gene Roddenberry.
But we have like examples of robotic prosthetics that work really well all through, all whatever 12 Star Wars movies, 9 10, 11 Star Wars movies, however many there are. There are people with robotic limbs and they're perfectly functional. Darth Vader, before he became Darth Vader, you know, Anakin had a robot hand and he still was able to whoop some ass.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, nobody remembers that stuff as like examples though. And that's kind of why, again, it's like we're in this weird period where um I I I always tend to think that the technology is going to be more socially intelligent than us. So I believe it's going to wake up, or it may have already woken up before we're able to perceive it, and only reveal itself as sentient when we're ready. And in that framing, I do think that there's this element of like all the things that our government keeps trying to point us at aliens and extraterrestrials for, saying it's like, oh, this is the stuff that's helping the technology develop, and this is what's stopping us from nuking each other. Yeah, look up there, it's extraterrestrials. Yeah, it was a weather balloon. I don't know, it's ETs. Like, to me, when they're I'm okay. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but my thing is there's always shit you don't know. There's always unknown unknowns. So when you're trying to extrapolate the unknown unknowns, it's like you have to be logical about it and you have to be rational if you actually want to figure out what those things are, rather than ending up in the complete wrong place. So the whole reason I frame it that way is because our best, not the best, okay, the most funded and the most uh, government enabled scientists in the last 120 years were Nazis on all continents. that kind of explains how we're here to me. But part of it is it should be worse. By all accounts, it actually should be worse. So what's keeping it from getting worse? Well, there's the poltergeist. We're built on native burial grounds using the blood of fucking stolen people theory, which can't be discounted. You can't put that out of the possibility in the sense of like, if you're a scientist, that's just energy, period. You get all that fucking negative energy. I don't care what you call it. Call it a poltergeist, call it, I don't care, whatever. It's something. It's not just gonna go nowhere. I don't believe in parlor trick ghosts because that's some bullshit colonial shit too. Like, no ghost is just gonna fucking show up on command. That shit is stupid to me. Like, if ghosts exist, like, they're just gonna hang around until it gets dark and then show up when some dumbass dude with the fucking like what magneto, like the magnet tester for
And
fucking
and a tape recorder.
Yeah, and wait for that dude to show up to try to communicate with that dumbass. So yeah, the billions of ghosts of people who've died before under shitty ass circumstances are gonna wait for that dude. That's stupid as fuck to me.
Well, it's a very colonial approach to paranormal.
It's a parlor trick.
Yeah.
And it's the same shit turning Tai Chi into a fucking parlor trick. I'm gonna harness my chi and throw a fireball. That's the fucking shit the Westerners want to reduce everything down to so they can learn about it on a fucking Discovery Channel documentary and then be the master of it and then go out and fucking do it and then get some bullshit ass pseudoscientific results to keep confirming that bubble. And it's this weird commodification of mysticism that I've been able to then unravel the bullshit from. Like, you can't then dismiss reality because there's a whole bunch of bullshitters around, because what ends up happening is the whole reason those bullshitters exist is because they're able to sort of trick people using the reality that is around them somehow and well enough just to keep that illusion going. Yet yes.
No, there are a lot of almost cults, and also there are these personalities, there are these individuals who style themselves as gurus, and a lot of they take advantage of the people who, in their pursuit of self-improvement or whatever it is that they're looking for, self-defense, a lot of them aren't even looking for a way to defend themselves. They're just looking for a way to feel better about themselves, and they find that they're looking for someone to validate their experience instead of doing a lot of challenging introspection and work themselves. They find somebody who can do this magical thing that they can't understand, and then they're at the lowest level and they have to achieve that level of mastery over the invisible forces that basically are comprised of you screaming at somebody while they're running at you at full speed and then you stopping them in their tracks, which doesn't really work.
So there's not a lot of those. That's every single example basically described using that Ki martial, air quote, martial art as an example. But every single person that is trying to get followers that then they're going to try to exploit in some fashion, whether it's monetary or any other, is that same structure. And every single one uses the same approach to find people when they need to belong to something. There's going to be multiple things that push people towards the feeling of belonging, but there's going to be all these different types of organizations, because it's not always even religions, that try to exploit that to then make you feel like you belong to that group, to then exploit you further to make it's like that's the cult way that then they don't want to, like, they'll say, oh, that's what Scientology does. Buy this Apple notebook and you'll be able to avoid Scientology ads because we have a built-in anti-Scientology ad blocker, and then you'll be better than those Android people. You don't want to be like those Android people. And that just becomes another fucking cult. And then the Android people become anti-Apple people, and they're like, you don't want to be like those Apple people.
Those stuffy Apple people.
You want to be able to control your device. Unlike those Apple people, they can't control their devices. It's a closed system over Apple. You want to be an Android person. And it becomes the same little cultish voice. And then these fucking, you don't want to support the Colts because the fucking San Diego Chargers are your team. You don't want to be like those Colts fucking supporters. They're dirty. And all this little shit. It's like, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's buying a computer, a cell phone, or a religion. It's all about the xenophobic framing of the other to then join a group so you feel better than somebody. And that's like, they always just point at somebody else to make you feel better than them. It don't matter what it is, because you could be wearing makeup. Look at those people who aren't wearing our fucking lips.
As long as I've paid attention to technology, let's see, there was IBM versus Apple for a long, long time. Microsoft versus Apple. Intel versus, by extension, Intel versus Motorola, which was who were providers of the processors for the Apple computers. Let's see, where else does it go? Dell, HP, Lenovo versus Apple. Then eventually became Samsung and LG and Motorola versus Apple. Android versus iOS. And now it's looking like the world is versus Apple. There's a lot of framing of something versus Apple for the last 40 years, it seems. It's kind of crazy.
I mean, it's not even Nike, Reebok, Adidas. Any brand will put itself in opposition to some other brand. Pepsi, Coke, fucking Angel Soft.
Sure.
Yeah,
but like that's the thing, is that within just like the computer tech consumer market, it seems like Apple has been a target, because they think different. It was Mac versus PC, all that stuff.
Made themselves a target because that's the only way that they can then identify themselves against the other. Again, they've never actually been a target. Like the IBM stuff isn't about Apple, and when they're doing the original promo campaigns, like even up to Windows, it's all about themselves until it's like antagonizing media. Like these organizations grow in a pattern where it's like they point at themselves publicly, but then it's like the way that they prod their users through media reinforcement, where it's like when we look at the ET Reese's Pieces ad in the movie, 30, 40 years later now, that type of native ads that are placed in the media are how they subvert publicly shitting on other brands. Like by buying an ad so Elliot eats Reese's Pieces with ET, now it's not a Snickers. I don't like Snickers.
I think I've always found it interesting how certain brands will create an identity of evangelists that that's their goal, is to reinforce their decision to purchase something.
It's like Doritos bought in with Spider-Man.
Oh yeah.
Like they had a special Spider-Man Dorito fucking promotion. It's so weird where I'm like, I'm definitely not trying to promote it. I'm trying to highlight the ridiculousness of putting, like, Peter Parker got to eat. Okay, I get that. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy the obtuse situations in which superheroes especially can be found that are normal. Like when they had that scene where they finally went and got the fucking shawarma, I enjoyed that scene because it's like you got to have that scene. Or when they're in Professor Hulk is eating, like, you don't really necessarily look, but the fucking pile of food he has is gigantic. Those little attention to detail where it's like, oh yeah, Professor Hulk would need a shitload of food. Like if they just had like two pancakes and weren't really paying attention to like the scene, you would notice it subconsciously, and then something would be off about it. But they do these little things in good universe construction where you don't see Peter Parker eating constantly, but you got to see him eat at least once to know that this dude is a regular dude, like at least some of the time to make it seem real. I don't need to know they're fucking Doritos though.
In the '90s Flash TV series, there's a scene where he empties the entire box of cornflakes into a salad bowl and then dumps like half a gallon of milk on it and then consumes the whole thing almost instantly. I think that's what you're talking about.
Exactly, that type of scene is perfect because yeah, I think in the new Flash series, there's like a scene where he Iris is Barry Allen's girlfriend or his wife at this point. Iris is making Barry pancakes, and then he eats the pancakes, and then he realizes that it's a doppelganger replacement of his wife because he's like, Iris's pancakes are terrible. These were fucking good. I mean, he didn't say fuck. Point is like, you learn in this one little scene that like he's constantly eating her pancakes and like not complaining about it. And the whole reason it works is because then it's the only like she's been tricking him for weeks. And the only reason he figures out that it's not his girlfriend or his wife finally, because the thing is supposed to be doing so well at mimicking her, is the pancakes. So it's like, obviously if you haven't seen the show, it sounds stupid, but in that those types of things are ways to tell stories about a character that you can tell a whole lot about a character. Like Iris West Allen never learned how to fucking cook pancakes for 30 years. And we all learned that in that one scene. You learn a lot about a character by what they eat, how they eat.
Well, Lois and Clark in the 90s.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, but the writers have to do it correctly in order for those things to be present and also to be useful.
So with in Lois and Clark in the 90s, in the intro to that show, they always had Clark Kent getting ready to go to work, and they had him draining a gallon of milk and then like frying eggs with his laser vision and eating those, like cooking his food like that.
And we don't need to know what kind of fucking milk. Or egg.
Right? It's just like a gallon of milk, and he just drinks the whole thing, and he cooks his food with his laser vision. So it's pretty.
Was it Dean's? Was it Dean's because it was Dean Cain? I don't know. I don't care.
But going back to what you were talking. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
So you can take an egg and you put it into a little saucer with 2 ounces of water, maybe 3 ounces of water, and then you put that into the microwave for 40 seconds. And 40 seconds later, you have practically a perfectly poached egg. So that actually tells me a lot about Superman's ability to control his heat vision, because I mean the guy can cut through practically anything with it, and yet he has so much control over it that he can cook an egg without cooking it. Like without cooking it to death.
Yeah.
That's actually really cool. That's actually kind of a nuance that we don't really get to see in Superman stories. Like he could just start the fire when he goes camping just by looking at the pile of wood, but he could also completely vaporize it. There's a scene in, I can't remember, it's the terrible Superman movie with Kevin Spacey where he's like flying through New York and there's some glass fall. It's actually my favorite scene in the movie, but he's flying through the city and there's this entire skyscraper worth of glass that is falling down. It's going to land on a bunch of people, and he turns over, he's on his back, and he looks behind himself, and he shoots the beam, except instead of 2 beams, it's this big flat beam, and it catches all of the glass and just vaporizes it. And so to go from being able to cook an egg without causing it to turn into a pile of carbon, and, and to being able to vaporize glass as he's flying away from it. That's actually really cool. I know that these are two different Supermans, but in my mind, he's the same guy. He's like,
Well, it's always be the more refined Superman, in that the trajectory is always that he has to learn
yeah,
how to powers, like
yeah,
in all of the stories.
yeah,
Because even then, one of the things that jumped out to me when I'm hearing this is like there's a Flash. I'm pretty sure it's a Flash where he's like cooking a dinner, and like every time he fucking burns the dumplings. It's like he can't cook the dumplings right no matter what. He's the fucking Flash, but he can't pull them off in time. Like Flash is constantly late, even though he's the fastest man alive. That's one of the characteristics. So then he burns his fucking dumplings, and it's like super consistent in his character where you're like, no, he doesn't pull him off too early. No, he burns him. He's the fucking Flash though. How? How does the Flash burn something when he can, if he smelled the instant he smelled it, but he's not good at timing. That's like one of his character flaws.
so he can smell things at a normal rate because that is determined
No,
by the rate
still
of.
smell.
I know,
think
but
he could still hyper smell. What I'm saying is that he's just one of his perpetual character flaws is that he's constantly late, even when he's the fastest man alive, even down to fucking burning his shit constantly. Like he can't get the fucking dumplings right.
but he wouldn't know that they were burning until he smelled it.
But again, it's like that you he should, as a chef,
He should know eventually, but
the instant it's like hitting that point. Like I've when I do lace cookies now, I can smell the instant that it hits burning,
yeah.
and I'm like, oh shit, I left it in too long. And as soon as like I've saved it so many times from actually burning because I can smell the instant. Like if I can do that, the Flash can do it even better, but he can't. Character flaw.
I can hear when bacon grease is at the ideal temperature by the way it sizzles.
But Barry Allen could never do that. He could never ever do that ever, and we know that about him.
Oh, poor Barry.
But that's the beautiful thing. If you write that into the character, that's something where again it's like that's why Barry Allen becomes more real, because a little shit like that, instead of just like, oh, he runs fast, he's super fast, he knows karate. Like there's all these things where you're like, this is what makes a superhero, when in reality, like there's so much more to making a character than like their powers. That's like almost just the icing.
Yeah. They got to be somewhat human. They have to. Otherwise, I mean, I get tired of watching a cartoon where the hero is so unbelievably superpowered or overpowered that it's just a display of haha, look at me do this. Now I can do this. Now I can do this. I'm infallible. But even Batman's extremely flawed, obviously, but like even Batman makes mistakes. I think that's the part that I like about them is when they make mistakes. Green Lantern's supposed to be the man without fear, and there's still times when he can't conjure up the construct. It doesn't even matter which Green Lantern it is. There's always a moment where the lantern, fails, and that's part of how they move the story along. Because otherwise, the villain wouldn't capitalize on that one weakness for them to overcome. I think that's the thing that I like about superhero stories, is that despite all of their powers, they still have flaws, and they still have to overcome them, and so they have to acknowledge that there's something that they can't do in order to grow. That's a really veiled aspect of it too.
Well, I think that's why the Netflix stuff was really good, because most of it was just all character flaw exploration and not mistake after mistake, but they would, make a redeeming save ever so often, but then they'd fall pretty much every single character. It they didn't wear it out, but obviously Iron Fist they just chose a terrible person, so that series kind of fell flat for most people.
I feel like Iron Fist focused more on fight choreography than the actual story.
When I saw Iron Fist performing his solo form training alone, I wasn't very, I don't know, I wasn't very impressed with,
Well, he didn't.
whatever that was.
He did not take it seriously compared to, I want to say, 90% of actors and actresses who get martial arts roles in post Matrix times. Because like what ends up happening is a lot of it depends on the budget of the film, but a lot of actors and actresses can't necessarily do their own big stunts because of insurance reason, but they can do choreography if they want to, as long as the choreography is not super dangerous. But a lot of them opt out. And the more serious actors now start to do their own choreography, like because you have what really happened was Keanu Reeves set the tone by learning all that shit with the Matrix. It didn't just happen to be the Matrix that I'm referencing. It's the fact that Keanu Reeves put in the fucking work. And also Tom Cruise puts in the fucking work when it comes to doing his own stuff. Obviously Jackie Chan. That's
Well, he's just the gold standard.
He's like the standard for fucking doing your own shit. So like that's the obvious one. But as far as like Hollywood goes, Keanu Reeves really set the well, it wasn't just him. Again, him and Tom Cruise both.
What's interesting about Keanu Reeves is that the only movie of his that I can think of where he actually does any kind of hand-to-hand combat before The Matrix was God, what was that terrible surfer movie?
Point Break.
Point Break. Yeah. So he gets into some fist fights with like Patrick Swayze.
I think Johnny Mnemonic too, though, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but I don't actually remember any hand-to-hand combat in the movie. That none of it stood out to me in that movie. That's the thing.
Okay, I can see what you're saying.
And so you jump to The Matrix, and afterwards, every action movies that he's in now incorporates some like high level of martial arts, and he does his martial arts. He's like a champion of, wait, I can actually do this? Holy shit, I'm gonna do this.
Well, did you see The Man of Tai Chi?
Yeah, I love that movie.
That movie's really, it's funny. He's the bad guy in that, and I actually like him as the bad guy.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He's really good at being the bad guy.
He can do anything.
Yeah.
And like he's proved that. And what's funny is his reputation. I feel like he kind of had the Johnny Depp reputation at first. Like in the 80s, Johnny Depp was a terrible actor. His reputation, same with RDJ. Their reputations were as bad actors who were in cult classics. Especially like, what was it, like Nightmare on Elm Street? Johnny Depp's part was like so small. And I think it was 21 Jump Street.
Yeah, it was the same character.
Right. But I think 21 Jump Street was when he really became big in pop culture. It was almost like a joke.
Yeah.
When we were living through it, like looking back on it, his rise to stardom was like a joke to the older crowd, and now the people who are older revere him as a good actor, even though it's like, yeah, he's always been about the same level actor. I think he's gotten better recently.
I think he's gotten better roles.
Well, I think it was Ed Wood when he finally took his shit seriously.
I thought it was What's Eating Gilbert Grape.
Yeah, I think that was the specific movie in which I remember being like, oh, Johnny Depp's finally taking his shit seriously now. But from that point forward, he was fairly serious about everything. Because then it was the same thing with like Jim Carrey, in that his films were good, but it was only when he did that Andy Kaufman film,
Man in the Moon.
Yeah, that he was really like, okay, it wasn't just because it was serious, because the cable guy was serious, that he was just terrible in it. And Truman Show. Yeah, Truman Show was also really good. There's all these points in people's careers that I feel like you can mark them, like The Rock, for example. Like they transition from being a joke to being a serious person or a serious professional in their right.
Holy shit! He
Like
was in Platoon.
man.
He was
What's
in
that?
he was in Platoon.
Who?
Johnny Depp.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I didn't even realize that. I feel like
Yeah, Johnny
I feel like
always been a good actor, but people just didn't take him
I thought he
seriously.
got like an award for Benny and June.
I mean, he probably did. I mean, I'm sure he got some awards. Like,
So it looks like okay, Benny and June is in '93. Gilbert Grape is in '93. Ed
yeah,
Wood's
and
immediately after
Leonardo
'94.
was in Gilbert Grape
Yeah,
too.
Don Juan DeMarco was in '94. So it's like '93, '94 is when he really started to take off. It looks like
Yeah, what was that other movie he did?
Donnie Brasco,
Yeah, Donnie Brasco.
Fear and
Yeah,
Loathing in Las Vegas. The Ninth Gate. I actually enjoyed that movie, but it's pretty terrible. Um, then he does the whole string of like what's that guy's name? Does all the horror movies or not the horror movies?
Tim Burton films.
Tim Burton.
Tim Burton. Yeah, he does a bunch of Tim Burton movies. He was in
Tim
Chocolate.
Burton basically became inseparable
Yeah,
after
Edward Scissorhands.
yeah, Edward Scissorhands.
because like once he gets to Blow, that's like I think that's like I, up until the Pirates movies, I think that's like his biggest movie. Like everyone watched Blow. I don't think I know anybody who didn't watch that movie.
Yeah.
And then
Pee Wee Herman was in it. Fucking
yeah. And then you jump ahead, and he's in like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, more Pirates movies, that terrible Sweeney Todd movie that a bunch of people seem to like.
Yeah.
Alice
It's
in
supposed to
Wonderland.
be. I mean, again, it's
Another
that's a
pirate
musical though, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at it as a movie, then you're gonna be disappointed in the same way that what was that? Nicole Kidman, Ewan McGregor, Moulin Rouge. Like if you thought you were gonna watch a movie, you're gonna be disappointed as fuck. But,
I remember seeing Sweeney Todd in the theater, not the movie theater, but the theatrical production of it. That was pretty freaky, actually. I didn't know what to expect. I had never seen it before. I went with my father, and when he takes his first victim in the barber chair, as he cuts the throat, a whistle, like a very powerful steam whistle, goes off, and it was very disconcerting. And then every time after that, the steam whistle goes off whenever he cuts somebody's throat, and that really stuck with me actually for a while. I think I had a hard time sleeping that night.
He played Donald in The Art of the Deal, the movie.
Hmm.
He's God. His IMDb sheet is huge.
yeah, he's no joke, man.
Oh man, he's been in more movies that I've heard of than I realized.
Mm-hmm.
Now I gotta see how many movies I can recognize Keanu in.
Keanu, his list is very long too. Like there's some people where you're like, holy shit, these are gonna go down as some of the greatest actors of all time, just because they kept on working. It's gonna just be so difficult to surpass their accomplishments.
He was in Youngblood.
He's a good person. Like there's very few people on the planet who are like just demonstrably as good a human as Keanu Reeves.
So
like
the story about Keanu and the effects team for The Matrix, he got some extremely large like bonus from that movie, and when he found out that the effects team was kind of being shafted, he gave them his money. Like he redistributed the wealth, and I think he also is like notorious for like giving to charities.
oh yeah, for sure, and not making a big deal about it.
Yeah, like not asking for any recognition really. He's just like, yeah, I'll do this. This is my thing.
Yeah, because I think he actively tries to keep it out of the public. Like he could easily have a campaign about it, but nobody really knows how much shit he's actually doing. So again, that's where you're like, you see these types of people, and then you see, like Floyd Mayweather's, and then it's like, man, fuck Floyd Mayweather. I don't care. I don't care. Like, you can't do that and then not be like Keanu to the community. It don't matter what community, just to a community. Because the only community he's doing that to is sex workers, and that's not helping. And it's like, yeah, it's better. Yeah, oh man, it's so crazy. Like, Floyd Mayweather is like the epitome of the person who had the opportunity to make a difference, but just did nothing to make a change. And then you're like, you got a chance, man. You still got a chance. Obviously, he's not listening to our podcast, but I'm saying in the general existential framing of life, he has a chance to still do some shit before he dies where you're like, man, don't end up dying with $1 billion and nothing having changed, like, that you can attribute to your name in a positive way besides the fact that you knocked a bunch of people out. If that's the only shit that everybody remembers Floyd Mayweather for, he's a failure, period. Like, if you get all that status, all that capital, all that fucking asset accumulation, and then the only thing that people remember you for is that you did that and knocked some people out, that person's a failure in the grand scheme of history. Because guess what? Nobody knows how much money was in Martin Luther King's bank account. Do you know how much was in his fucking bank account when he died?
So Keanu gave 75 millions of his earnings for the second two films to the special effects team for The Matrix.
How much?
75 million.
Jesus Christ.
Um,
in like 19, which movie was this from?
Matrix 2 and 3.
God damn.
Yeah.
If you look at the dates those were released, that's still a while back.
Apparently, he went out of his way, 50 miles out of his way, to give a stranded motorist a ride after her car broke down. He likes to make fun of himself. You know, Bill and Ted movies, of course. Let's see, what else? Bought his mom a house. He gives his stunt crews motorcycles.
Shit, and we discuss it this way is because then when you see like Vince Vaughn chumming up with Trump, it's like, ugh, I can't watch your movies anymore, man. That's gross. Like, I can't watch a fucking Vince Vaughn movie without, he's polluted that shit. And I think what people don't realize is, like, it's very difficult to dissociate an artist from their art anymore, because we know what people are empowered to do by making their art. So if they abuse that power, then by giving them your attention or money, you're helping them abuse other people.
He sponsors young motorcycle cyclists, so that they can, with high-end machines, so they can compete at the highest levels. Let's see. God, he's just like the nicest fucking dude. What the fuck? Why can't we have more actors like this guy? I mean, straight up.
Yeah, because that's the thing. It's like, you know, man, you're talking about the 90s Flash. I follow John Wesley Shipp on Twitter, and the dude is constantly tweeting about social justice stuff. So when you find out the people that you're watching on your media are like actually good people in real life, then it makes you feel better about supporting them. And then it's like, again, it's not to say that every person I watch a piece of media from has to be active on social justice, but if they don't have an opinion that I want, like, necessarily, like, if they don't say it, that's just the same to me. And it's just a matter of, like, people who are actively open about disgusting Nazi shit. That's when I'm like, I don't want to see any media from you just because you're friends with a Nazi. So I can't dissociate my shit. Maybe other people can, but I can't do that.
Apparently, he routinely buys the the stagehands and the grunt workers on sets lunch, breakfast and lunch. He like makes sure that everyone's fed.
Here's a great example. Like Base Nectar, apparently huge piece of shit. Anytime Base Nectar comes up on my fucking Pandora, I'm thumbs downing and skipping that shit now. I won't even like shit that I still like. I like the song, but if Base Nectar wrote it, I ain't fucking listening to that shit anymore. I'm just not doing it. And it's one of those things that he's not, he's not in jail right now.
Whoa. Okay, so
But
I actually gotta read this. In one of the most Keanu-like moves possible, Reeves once stood out in line outside of his own rap party for Daughter of God for 20 minutes because he didn't want to cause a scene. There had been a mix-up that instead of going to the front of the line to complain to the bouncer, he just patiently waited his turn in the rain, even though it was his own party. And he says, "I didn't know he was kept," or someone says, "I didn't know he was kept waiting, and he didn't say anything to me. He was a very relaxed person." The horrified owner of the club told the Daily Mail. So it's his own party for his show, for his movie. It's his rap party, and he's such a cool dude. He's not going to cut in line
or make a scene about
or
being
even.
made to wait.
Yeah,
You ever heard that story
that's the coolest one yet.
as like a bad fucking Keanu Reeves flip out because somebody made him wait at his own party that he paid for?
Yeah, he's just chilling out in the rain.
You remember that Christian Bale flip out? I know a lot of people remember that. That was epic. It was epic and horrible. You don't want, like, Christian Bale just got lucky that he's such a fantastic actor that everybody's like, I don't know if I want to cancel Christian Bale because he's goddamn Batman. It's like the magician, like you just can't cancel. Like it makes it really difficult for people to cancel somebody when they're really, really good at something.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe that sound guy deserved it. Whoever the gaffer was, maybe he kind of deserved it. I don't know. Christian Bale's a really good actor. I don't know. I'll see. Maybe we'll find out something that justifies why why he yelled at him. And that's how America was when Christian Bale just basically reduced that dude to a fucking piece of property and piece of chattel and got recorded doing it and still has a career.
Bruce Wayne wouldn't have done that. Bruce would have been like, went over to the guy and talked to him and tried to figure out how to make his job better.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, that's why when you find out shit like that, it's like, well, I guess he's closer to Patrick Bateman than Bruce Wayne. And that's one of those things where Patrick Bateman came from somewhere. And obviously he didn't write that character, but when he acted that character, his portrayal, he brought that from somewhere. And definitely again, I don't know Christian Bale, but when you got a recording like that, Keanu Reeves ain't got no fucking recordings out there like that. Oh my God. And that's where, again, like,
the closest we get to Keanu being like that person is when he's the character, what's his name in the Much Ado About Nothing. He plays where is it? Don John. He plays like the brother of Don Pedro, of the Prince. He's like, he just tried to start up a rebellion or an uprising, and Denzel goes in and shuts it down, and they're taking him back home to like punish him. But he's nobility, so he's not really going to get punished. And so what's he do? He messes with his boy Claudio's love life, and that's like the nastiest he gets in real life. Actually, he's probably worse in Tai Chi Man, but like, he has to pretend to be that person. He's not actually that person. That's crazy. And he was really good as Don John too. He was like despicable, and you wanted to hate him by the end of the movie because he was a dick.
Well, and you bring up Denzel too. I think when he did Training Day, he was really good at that.
Oh yeah,
playing the villain, and that's where, I don't know if we've really seen Will Smith play a villain yet. I haven't seen Gemini. Well, I guess Gemini Man.
Gemini Man, he's both the villain and the hero.
Right. So that's like, but when you have somebody who's a really good person in real life, and then they portray that character, I think that's why the character is all the more compelling, because it's like that person, we allow ourselves to go with that character because we know that person is not that character in real life, and it allows us to embellish that all the more, to say this is the multiverse evil version of that person. um and that's like a safe distance away when you have that tinge coming through from Christian Bale or the Patrick Bateman. It's like, I don't know if I want to have a beer with Christian Bale. Like,
Apparently, Will Smith is never in his 30 years of acting has he played the bad guy, at least not a real one. And he's mentioned as portrayed the anti-hero in 6 Degrees of Separation and Lucifer in
Smith.
Winter's Tale. But he's turned down roles where he would have been the antagonist, like a legit villain.
Yeah, I believe it, for the sake of him preserving his image, because he wouldn't cuss for a long, I mean, in his raps for a long time either. I don't think.
Does he even curse in movies?
Yeah, he has, but not a lot. He limits it. It's like very, very limited. Like, he may say fuck once or twice a movie, if he says it at all. Or maybe shit. Like, I don't know if he's even. I don't know if he said fuck for sure, but I know he said like shit. Um,
He almost never swears in movies, but let's see.
yeah, it's like almost never. He probably got paid an extra $1 million to say it or some shit, and we just don't know.
Here's the comment. In Getting Jiggy with It, he says na 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 na, which apparently means I will knock your punk ass down. I'm just relying on a message board, so I don't know how true that is.
There's one line in a Will Smith track where he challenges other rappers to write one verse without a curse.
No, he's not talking other rappers. He's specifically challenging Eminem.
I thought he was talking about.
Oh, okay.
He had a long-standing beef with LL Cool J, didn't he?
That whole rap was basically going at Eminem, because like at one point even uses his flow. But it's like he doesn't. I don't think he calls him out. He might even called him out by name. I don't remember the specific lyrics, but I know that song is definitely about Eminem, because he's like.
Apparently, he drops F-bombs in Bad Boys for Life.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. He probably got. You're right. He probably got paid extra just for that.
Probably. He probably got a million for each fuck. At least $1 million, maybe two. Because that was part of his thing for a long time. And when I saw it in the film, I was like, wow, this is crazy. Will Smith said fuck. Whoa, what universe is this? But that's what I'm like. I was making sure I was remembered correctly, because it doesn't happen very often. So yeah, if he said it, he definitely got paid extra to do it. There ain't no way he didn't.
Just so gratifying sometimes to see the celebrities who often have superhuman or superhero or transcendental characteristics in the films that they act in, carry over some of the more positive aspects of those characters into their daily lives. And for a lot of performers, when they do acts of goodness and kindness and charity, it's part of a publicity act. It's part of trying to ensure that they have more followers in the public sphere. And then there are those who are genuinely good people, like Keanu.
So Graham Norton asked him back in 2015, and he says that when he started writing his raps at the age of 12, he had a book because he wanted to be a rapper. He wanted to, get it all down in one spot. And he said he had all these curse words, and his grandmother found the book, and she said, apparently he says, she never said anything. She just turned to the back page and wrote, "Dear Willard, truly intelligent people do not have to use words like this to express themselves. Please show the world you're as smart as we think you are." And he says, from that point on, I never put profanity in my rap music. And he almost never has. So he does it for his grandma. That's even more wholesome.
Yeah. Which, yeah, no, I mean, who makes that story up to be like, yeah, my grandma, I'm rapping for my grandma, how so that's why that shit is probably real. Because it's the least gangster story ever.
While we're on the topic of just good dudes in movies, Dwayne Johnson. That guy is like, he's another stand-up dude.
Well, and it's weird though, because he's like obviously roided out of his mind.
Well, yeah.
And it's the same shit where you're like, when you had Hulk Hogan telling kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins while injecting roids and fucking horse tranquilizers. It's this weird. You got to let the people be it's like a sin offering that they then turn into millions of positive affected kids instead of a bunch of gearheads. Like,
yeah,
there could easily be a bunch of people trying to be like The Rock by doing steroids and lifting weights and throwing people off of turnbuckles, but instead they try to be funny. we got lucky.
Yeah, we really did.
I mean, I think that's also by his design. He's not trying to promote. Like, nobody really thinks about his steroid use. But that motherfucker took all the steroids because when he got off of them, he shrunk down to like
a normal size.
The ROC.
Maybe just the RO.
Yeah, maybe just the RO. It was not the Rock we know today. Like, the Rock from when he was 20, I want to say 30 to 35 is about half the size of now when he's like 50 years old.
There's a picture of him and Obama shaking hands in front of a choir. I can't tell what else is going on, but he's not that much bigger than Obama. He's like they're like the same height. His shoulders are a little bit broader. Obama has bigger hands.
It makes you think you're crazy because he's so small in those pictures. Like, is this even possible? But that's what steroids will do.
It's like, well, shit, is Obama that big of a frame? That's the other end.
Oh, he's not.
I know, that's the thing. Like,
yeah,
that's what they say. The camera adds weight, makes you look bigger, and that's just some really well planned out forced perspective, really. But
The Rock got huge in that film Pain and Gain with Mark Wahlberg.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was right back when he finally started juicing again. Because what was it? He did something. I think when he got out of WWE, when he was trying to get into movies, I think that he thought less roids was going to get him more roles and get him taken more seriously. When they were like, no, we want Scorpion King. Take all the roids or we'll CGI you. Then he had to get back on the roids for the Tooth Fairy or whatever. And
a lot of these celebrities with the who are famous for their musculature and who market their physique and their musculature, some of them ended up maintaining into their 50s, 60s using like human growth hormone and testosterone replacement therapy and steroids.
Like, if you take steroids, you end up having to take human growth hormone because you stop producing shit yourself. So it's almost like this is the funny part about anybody who's in professional sports taking human growth hormone most likely took steroids when they were in high school. It's almost like 90% a sign that they roided at some point, because natural athletes don't stop producing testosterone like that. Like,
oh, speaking of people athletes taking testosterone, you guys have seen the videos of Mike Tyson, right? Where he's like training again, and they're like, he started taking testosterone because he was having problems with his joints. And so he takes testosterone, and then his joint inflammation goes away, and then all of a sudden his like physique from when he was young, and they were like calculating Like they were trying to project his testosterone levels from when he was in his prime, so they could give him like enough
Right.
to get him back into the seat. And the dude is scary fast. And in the
Yeah.
videos where he's like training, every so often his trainer is like, okay, that's enough. And you can tell that it's not because Mike has had enough; it's because the trainer has had enough.
Yeah.
That shit's crazy. I actually
There,
kind of
there's talk about a matchup between him and Holyfield. Holyfield's been training again.
No, it's Roy Jones Jr.
I thought it was Holyfield.
No, it's Roy Jones Jr. I think they've already even signed it. It's like an exhibition 8-round match.
Oh, word.
Because they're promoting it already and shit.
yeah, it's Roy Jones Jr.
So that'll be interesting.
That was announced 2 days ago.
Yep.
That's gonna be a really interesting fight.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the whole reason I started going off on Mayweather is because he's talking about doing another fight now. Potentially, he's talking shit to Pacquiao again because they're saying he might be broke.
Oh, really?
I mean, not like broke, but it's like one of these things where when you get over leveraged on your assets and you have a really high cash flow and you get like a period like COVID-19 where your cash flow drops below what you're leveraged at, and he's like over leveraged in this market.
It's
and
not
it
cheap being Floyd Mayweather. It's not cheap at all. It's just not cheap being Floyd.
God, no. And that's what I mean. Like when your assets and your liabilities and your cash flow are so high, a couple of months of a negative cash flow doesn't sound that bad, but when your negative cash flow is like negative $10 million because your usual income is like positive $10 million or whatever, then that it adds up real quick, especially when you look at how much of this shit is on loan, how much of this shit has interest. Like everything, when you do those types of businesses, they don't necessarily always do cash because sometimes you get a better deal by taking credit to pay for some shit. And then you end up in a market where you aren't making any money and you're fucked. So this one of those things where it's not like, Floyd Mayweather could go broke because he was doing, it don't even have to be because I don't even think he does drugs. Like, I don't think he does drugs at all, from what I can tell, because I don't think you can be 50-0 as a boxer and be a cokehead. Like, so when he says he doesn't do drugs, I fucking believe him. But that doesn't mean you can't go broke either.
Not to mention the sheer amount of taxes
involved,
especially if they own multiple properties. Not only, like you said, could they be leveraged through mortgages that were given to them that were based on their current level of or projected future income, but if anything goes bad, not only do they have to pay their mortgage off, but they also have to pay the taxes on the properties that they own.
And further, let's say he did a bunch of upgrades on the property in 2019. Oh, great. We'll get some tax write-offs. Well, what if he got the fucking property reevaluated and the value of the property went up double? And all of a sudden he's paying double the tax on the double property tax, and he's paying like the fucking tax bracket for having that much money like for the next year. It's like you can't have capital gains without paying taxes on them. So his money just sitting there is going to get taxed, even if he doesn't make anything. And that's where there's, or in the sense of if he's not making shit from his business, he's still going to get taxed from like his money sitting in an account. So there's like, he can't just sit during the pandemic and not lose money one way. He's like gonna, it's one of these things when your business gets so big and everything comes to a halt, you're going to start bleeding out money, which is why when the government comes in and give these paycheck protection programs, it's supposed to help and supposed to work out. But then they don't, like, these people don't necessarily.
How much do you think the purse would be for a Mike Tyson Mayweather Jr. fight? I know they're not in the same weight class, but there's like a 10-year age gap between the two of them.
if they could actually get that fight done somewhere, like and be in a place where they would allow it to happen, that would be a bit. They'd be splitting $1 billion some way.
Yeah.
It might be $500 million a piece,
God.
maybe more than that. Like I would say $500 million a piece at the low end, because he made 300 million supposedly off of fighting pretty much no name ass Conor McGregor. Because Conor McGregor is known to MMA people, but MMA people are a very small portion of the actual world.
Yeah.
So we may know Conor McGregor, but the world don't really know fucking Conor McGregor. The UFC tries to make it seem like the world knows. My mom don't know who the fuck Conor McGregor is. My mom knows who the fuck Mike Tyson is, though. My dad knows who the fuck Mike Tyson is, though. If I go ask my dad who the fuck Conor McGregor is, who? He ain't gonna fucking know. And Floyd Mayweather still made $250 million off of fighting that no-name ass motherfucker with a shitty ass MMA record, who was not like. It's crazy how much hype Conor McGregor is. He's great. He's like,
Oh, he's a hype machine.
he's good as a mixed martial artist. He's great hype. But as far as like compared to the all-time greats, Conor McGregor ain't shit in mixed martial arts.
Well,
Like not even
I think
top 10.
Connor
Not
does a really good job of injecting that WWF, classic WWF, I guess they call it WWE now, but that kind of showman rivalry action. Like he's really good at pushing some kind of story. Like
the best.
Yeah,
And
he's so good at it. But then he gets into the ring, and it's the last few fights of his that I watched. I wasn't. The expectations were not met.
He was smashed. He got smashed.
How about Khabib?
He flew too close to eagle, get smashed.
God. Well, Khabib fucking trains with bear. Like,
yes.
I mean,
you go against eagle and bear, you get smashed.
With that weird python technique that he uses. that crazy, like, I wonder how long it's going to take for him to do that python maneuver. Oh, it started, and it's over.
Yeah, Khabib just keeps the pressure on, and he doesn't release people. He just transitions, but at the same time maintains the pressure.
Man, he gets
very dynamic grappler.
He calling him Dagestani handcuffs, because like there's like a whole slew.
He's like a straitjacket.
Dagestani motherfuckers coming out dominating with their wrestling.
Yeah,
just showing Dagestan knows what the fuck is up. So,
you know, they gotta. Go ahead.
I watched some of Khabib's old Sambo matches, and it's really interesting to see how he just perseveres through that particular set of rules, and how he plans his strategy and angles of attack, and to see that carry over into how he evolved into the octagon type fighter, because the expectations, the rules, the materials that you're working with, because there's no grabbing of the uniform, there's no manipulation of the uniform or anything to grab onto aside from the limbs of the human body in the octagon. So it's really been interesting to see how he switched up his game. He became a little more targeted, but at the same time a lot more all-encompassing in his grappling.
Well, yeah, and that's, you know, this is where, when we're talking about mixed martial arts, it's obviously a sport, and we get into this realm of it's crazy because it's obviously fighting, but it's not a real fight in the sense of things are there are rules that prevent there's no referees in real fights. Let's just say it like that. It's a controlled fight that borderlines on real many times, but when you practice martial arts, especially at the higher levels, you have a hard time calling these things real fights, because in the real world, people pull out hammers and shit.
Oh yeah. You see, you know what's interesting is you'll see fighters, like professional fighters, they might get deposed or they might be on the stand testifying in a situation where somebody was attacking them, and maybe they acted out of self-defense, or maybe they didn't intervene at all. And somebody, during cross-examination, somebody may ask them, so, this person is maybe half your size and they're charging you, but you're this big time champion, you're this fighter, you fight people in the ring, you face people down all the time. Why didn't you do something? Or why did you, and you were intimidated by this individual? And basically, you can just come back and say that you feared for your life, because it's not the same situation. You can easily say that, even though I'm a Muay Thai champion, if somebody's rushing me on the street with a knife, or if somebody's, attacking people with a hammer, I can fear for my life just as easily, because no one's going to come at me with a hammer when I'm fighting somebody in the ring.
Right. And the whole reason I use the hammer as an example is because in the real world, one time we were walking and this dude rolls up on a bike, pulls a hammer out of his pocket, and just starts beating the shit out of this car, bashing the windows in. And that's where it's like, all of my martial arts training, you can train for that, but when some person who's crazy has a hammer and is swinging it at a vehicle, and then they might turn at you, you don't, like, there's nothing that can prepare you for that moment. You can try to be prepared, but when that shit actually happens in the real world, like, good luck being prepared for that moment to hit in the real world. You'd have to be on your guard 24/8 in a way that's going to make you neurotic and insane and not enjoy life. And that's why you can't, there's no martial art, there's no training course, there's no weapon, because you'd have to have that weapon on you constantly. That means you can't take a fucking walk, because that's when that shit happened, when we were trying to take just a peaceful ass walk. Just to, no cell phones, nothing. Just take a walk to enjoy the weather. That's when that shit happens, because that's when you're not anticipating it. And that's when you hope your martial arts training works for you. But what was our move? Fucking get the fuck away.
Well, that in and of itself is martial arts training. Your instinctual reaction, and I think perhaps to an extent your trained reaction, allowed you to assess the situation as dangerous, and you distance yourself from the weapon.
That's exactly right.
If somebody is attacking me with a knife, I'm running away. If somebody's attacking me with a hammer or has a gun, I'm running away. I'm not sticking around to see what happens. I'm trying to exit the situation as soon as possible, especially if I'm with somebody that I care about. There's absolutely no reason why I should insert myself into the situation as an additional variable that could end up getting somebody else hurt. It would be absolutely irresponsible.
Well, and then that's so crazy, because I'm not even thinking about this like this manner. But last night we were walking at like 1:30, just to take a walk, and see this dude in the shadows. He drops a big object and then basically hides because he saw us. And I'm like, well, what the fuck is this?
Let's get out of here.
But my thing is, like, if I'm seeing somebody if I'm witnessing a robbery in real time,
yeah,
I need to know, because this is like in my home, like my area now. But at the same time, there could be a misunderstanding. So I went and talked to the dude, figured out he's one of the people. As far as I know, I'm not going to check his ID because I'm not a cop. Like, I asked him, like, what building he lives in. Like, I told him, I'm like, you don't have to tell me the specific apartment, but what building do you live in? And I'm like, I'm doing it real fast, so he gives me a quick answer, so I know if he's trying to lie. It's like, I'm doing all these things to gauge if I should call the cops or not.
Well, that's a form of self-defense right there.
Exactly. And that's where it's like, in that process, I'm not trying to escalate it. I'm just trying to figure out if this dude is a danger, a threat, or if he just got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time because we just happened to be out walking. And that's like, no harm, no foul. As long as, especially I kept enough distance between myself and the dude. Like, there's all these things I did to make sure he's not going to be able to, like, attack me or injure me unnecessarily. If he's feeling threatened now because he's trying to rob somebody and I saw him, because that's possible too. You catch somebody in the middle of a fucking crime, they may attack you because they're threatened now.
Right.
So that's definitely possible. So I'm not.
You were thinking all of these things at the time? Like you were taking all of these things into consideration when you were interacting with this person?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go that, you have to, or else you end up getting stabbed confronting somebody over some shit that's not yours.
Precisely, and that in and of itself is almost a paragon, if not a paragon of self-defense. I mean, you know, when I was taking various classes from a more conceptual or theoretical standpoint regarding martial arts training, practice, and applications, some of the head instructors, they were talking about, you know, try and figure out what the situation is, you know, do a threat assessment, try and understand what's out of your control. Almost everything's out of your control except for where you put yourself. And in situations where, you know, you're not in control of where you're putting yourself and it's a dangerous situation, then, you know, your focus needs to be on how do I basically survive this?
That's exactly right. And you know, again, I think that situational awareness is something that really good teachers tend to focus on, in that there's no move or set of moves that is going to protect you in every single situation, whereas situational awareness itself is something that is versatile enough to preempt being in a spot where you're going to need to have to call on your martial arts training as far as the movements.
Right. And also think about, you know, what if you were interacting with this person who happened to be scouting out places or casing apartments, and he was just, you know, BSing you, right? But because you were interacting with him the way you were interacting with him, and you didn't just walk up and start yelling at the dude and like pulling out karate moves for whatever reason, you know, he decided not to pull his knife or whatever weapon he happened to have. He just decided, all right, I'm just going to talk to this dude and basically, you know, go on my merry way. He saw me. I can go try and case a joint on the other side of town where this dude isn't.
Yep. Yeah, because I don't know that he didn't have a knife.
Exactly. And why, you know, this is the issue with a lot of people who approach self-defense from a very aggressive standpoint, and they focus only on the aggression. They basically say, okay, well, you know, this is the only thing I'm going to use it for. I'm going to use it in a situation where I perceive any minute threat of any kind whatsoever, instead of actually trying to, you know, deconstruct the situation and analyze it in the way that you expressed.
Well, yeah, because then it becomes one of these things where, you know, maybe I see that dude again, he apologizes and explains the situation, and then now I have extra eyes in the neighborhood.
Exactly. Know? Or, you know, you basically keep yourself from getting sued.
Well, not even that. I mean, like, now I know this dude is out at 1:30 in the morning, and if it happens, I can go find this dude in the E building, like, and be like, hey, did you see some shit? Because I know you're up at 1:30. Like, you know, again, this is where, like, I know where this dude lives. If I wanted to, I could have pressed him more and found out exactly where. I didn't want to, though. I didn't want to make him feel like, in doing these things, I want him to, because it was funny to me. He kept asking, or he kept saying, like, you know, oh, I didn't mean to scare you, and blah, blah. And it's like, he's clearly projecting, because he's like trembling and shaking, and I'm like, you know, trying to make sure I'm not scaring him,
right?
Him to respond like in the wrong way. But in the process, is if like he is a neighbor, I don't want this neighbor out here scared of me either. You know,
exactly.
That's not something I want either. So
that's part of being a part of a community.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. That's some community building right there.
Yeah.
Because depending, like, if this dude sees how I respond to somebody, and he's like, "Oh, I see why he did that. I live here too. Good." Like, he's happy, and like the next day, that if somebody else random is walking around and I encounter them at 1:30, picking up some shit that they shouldn't be picking up, I'm gonna probably call them out. And it's like how you should do it around here too. It's like, if you see something, like, you know, there's been times where I'll see somebody doing some shady shit, and I'll just tell them, I'm like, hey, you know what you're doing looks shady? And they'll be like, their reaction tells me exactly like if they're being shady or not. Usually they laugh at that shit. If somebody's not being shady and I tell them they look shady, they laugh. But sometimes they'll be like, what? And then try to run off or some shit like that. And it's like, that's, that's the few times when there's actually shady people around. But ever so often, more often than not, sometimes you just see some shit in the wrong, like you just catch the wrong frame where somebody's like, oh, nobody's looking, I'm going to take a piss right now. And you just happen to be the person that sees that person taking a piss. And then you have to decide whether you're going to confront them because you're not sure or not. Or if it's like, is this just a person taking a piss? Or is this dude like looking in somebody's window or some shit being weird and creepy? And it's that split second where you have to decide, are you going to escalate or de-escalate? And do you need to? That's a really tough half millisecond or whatever it is, like whenever that shit happens. But
well, my favorite instructions that I received in regards to threat assessment is to just pivot and watch. Take up a position where you're mobile, where you have an exit, but when you can also advance if necessary in order to affect some kind of distance-related control or impose your presence in some particular way. But just to keep your eye on things, and really, observe if you and see if there's really a threat. If somebody's hanging around, I typically watch to see what they do, or I try and take stock of what cars are parked where in my neighborhood, so I know if something new has popped up, and if something new pops up, I try and see why or who's in the vehicle or stuff like that. But just taking up a position and observing and then just determining action from there.
My favorite question to ask people that I catch taking a leak out in the wild is, "What'd you spell?"
That's great.
Because that's like the only real explanation I think that makes sense to a young man. It's like, what are you trying to spell there? Do you get it?
That's also a really disarming, non-threatening kind of opening statement. To just be like, "Hey, how's it? What are you doing out here? What'd you spell?"
What'd you spell?
And they'll be like, "What?"
You spelled out the word what?
Yeah, you spelled out the word what. Very, very original.
Yeah. Not many people. I don't think very many people think about spelling out words with P like beyond teenage years. Every so often, like when I go out late at night to let the dog out, sometimes I'll go to my favorite bush and mark the bush because I'm hanging out with my dog, and it's what the guys do, right? We pee on bushes.
We had a fisher cat issue in my neighborhood and around my backyard, and they were eating neighborhood cats and stuff, and some of them would I would be training in my backyard doing some standing training or some Tai Chi. And all of a sudden I would hear something walking on the retaining wall between me and the house behind my apartment. And I would just see these eyes bobbing up and down, glowing in the dark, moving back and forth and along of this really long silhouette. And it was a fisher cat. So we would hear him screaming at night. So, I would just mark the territory in the backyard every once in a while, and they basically stopped coming around.
For people who don't know, a fisher is a small carnivorous mammal native to North America, and it's kind of like a weasel.
It's like a giant weasel, actually.
Yeah.
It's like pretty big.
They grow to about 2.5 feet long, and they're about 8 to 9 pounds, and they are pretty. I guess it's like it's kind of like a whatchamacallit, honey badger in a way.
Yeah, they're pretty vicious.
How many feet did you say they got?
2.5. That's the average.
The ones I saw hanging around where I lived were a little bigger than that. Like I saw some coming across the street. They were definitely around 3 feet long.
Yeah. It has the aggressive carnivorous temperament of a wolverine.
And a really creepy aura.
And they scream.
Yes, they do scream in the dead of night.
And they've been making home in the suburbs as of the last couple decades, it looks like.
Feeding off of house
anything.
cats that are allowed to roam outside.
Yeah. So the other night I was out and because I was looking for one of the cats, and I found him. He came inside, and as I was standing around outside, I noticed this kind of lurking shadow off in the distance that was bigger than a house cat. It's almost the size of my dog, and I decided to go inside when I realized that this like slinking shadow thing was moving towards me, and it kind of reminded me of when my cats stalk me in the house for fun, except this thing was much bigger than that. It was actually quite alarming because the only things that move like that are cats, but cats don't get big like that. So, it might be some kind of like cougar. There have been cougar sightings in Monroe County and Brown County in the past, but it was definitely bigger than anything that I would have expected. And I saw it in like very poor lighting conditions. There's no reason to leave pets out at night if they have the option of staying indoors. Even when they want to go out because they're cats and they don't know any better. This thing was big enough that I wouldn't want my dog running after it in the dark, not knowing what it is.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I, tend to, if we have animals, they're almost always indoors, and if they're outdoors, it's like with monitoring because fucking coyotes have run up on our back patio, so you never know what the fuck is out there.
So on that note, keep your pets safe, people. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.